Welcome to Fayette Footprints, a podcast about the people, places, and events that make up the fabric of Fayette County, Georgia. My name is Kenny Blum. I am a longtime resident of Fayette County, a bit of a history nerd, and now an amateur podcaster. Thank you for joining me today as we talk about some of the stories that we don't want to have forgotten. My first lineup is that I need to apologize. I'm running about a week and a half behind schedule. I usually like to release each of my podcasts at the very beginning of each month, but I had a couple of interview sessions that had to get bumped, and February was just a really busy month also. So I have learned that I need to stay a little bit ahead of my dates. That comes with being an amateur podcaster. I've also learned that I have met some of the most fascinating people in Fayette County. Those who are quietly working in their little niches, whether it's selling shoes or pizza or improving the lives of children in Fayette County and all across the state, and those, quite a few, who are preserving the stories of Fayette County history. And today's guest is just as extraordinary. I've also learned that you do your research, you get all your information together, you prepare your publication, you put it out there, you think you're done. Well, you're not. History has a way of having stories that just don't stop going, and that's one of the beauties of doing this podcast is to share those stories. Back in episode 3, I talked about the history of the Fayette County Courthouse. I went from the original construction all the way up through the firebombing of the 1980s, and I thought I had done a pretty thorough job. But not long after that, as we were coming up on the 200th anniversary back in November, it turns out that the courthouse was almost burned during the Civil War, or at least that's how the story was told. But what is even more unique is the very unique approach that one man took in trying to save our beloved courthouse. Today's guest is John Lynch, and he's going to bring us up to date on this story. He was named Fayette County Historian a few years ago, and he has spoken at countless engagements in and around Fayette County. But you'll find that he's actually a really reserved man. I get this feeling he prefers talking one-on-one rather than in a big crowd. And it even took a little persuading to let me record him. He was named our Fayette County Historian back in 2019, and for very good reason. John can trace his family's lineage back over 175 years right here in Fayette. He's also done an immense amount of research over the last several decades. He co-authored The History of Fayette County, Georgia, 1821 to 1971. That was a Fayette County Historical Society publication from 1977. He also helped create a family research document called All Known Cemeteries of Fayette County, Georgia, a resource you can find at the Fayette County Historical Center. It was published in 2005. He authored The Dorman Mashburn Letters with brief accounts of the 10th and 53rd Georgia Regiments, CSA. This and the next one were from Down South Publishing, this one in 1995. His next book was called Scarlett's Neighbors, which was published in 2014. He's written countless newspaper articles. He's been posted on many websites, and you can even see some of his articles on social media, not just through the Fayette County Historical Society profile, but also several other historical Facebook groups in and around Fayette County. He is a charter member of the Fayette County Historical Society, as well as the General Lafayette McLaws Camp of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, and he is a member of the General Marquis de Lafayette chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution. He received the award for local history advocacy from the Georgia Historical Records Advisory Council back in 2017. So it was absolutely my pleasure to get to sit down and talk with John Lynch. But on that note, if you do get a chance to meet John, don't talk. And I probably needed to learn a little bit more about that because John knows history so well. He can speak of all these people from history as if they're coworkers that he just left the office from. So in this upcoming episode, you're going to hear more of him just telling the story and not so much of an interview because John Lynch will answer most of your questions before you can even generate them. Here's my talk with John Lynch about the almost burning of the Fayette County Courthouse during the American Civil War.
Union officers told about, coming through Fayette County, and they came across this big wagon train, and, they burned the wagons and slaughtered the mules and captured a lot of prisoners. And they didn't specifically mention Tidwell in their reports, but they did mention, coming through Fayetteville and capturing the some home guards here and some prisoners that were in houses. And what the prisoners were soldiers that were recuperating from the Battle of Atlanta. And so they took some of them with them, and some of them they left, and they ransacked some houses here and all that. And of course, in the official records, they didn't. They kind of sugarcoated all that, but and told that they, captured soldiers and weapons, and they said they took the mail out of the courthouse and captured some payroll money, Confederate money, and I think one of them said they passed that out along the road as a joke, to people because it wasn't worth that much. Yeah. And what I couldn't understand is they burned 500 wagons, supposedly, big long wagon train of Confederate, wagons and mules and sabered mules, and that had to be a big deal in 1864, and it happened at night. And so, why didn't anybody write down about that? Maybe it was they were just too embarrassing, or either just too gruesome or whatever. But they didn't leave much to. For us to go on finding out about it. And hardly anybody that we talked to knew anything about that. And so we picked up little pieces of information here and there. And I did find one story that a lady and her daughter were going to their relative's house from Jonesboro, driving through Fayette County on a wagon, and they were cut across 54 over to McDonough Road, and they were trying to get down toward Griffin. And the girl mentioned that there's all this stuff was strewn on the roads where the mules were killed, and the pieces of wagons here and there. But they came across something they really wanted. They saw, and they really wanted it. And what it was paper. And the lady stopped the wagon and told her, said, "Get out and get what you can." And so she got out and was gathering up this paper, and they saw a squad of Yankees coming from either one of the directions, either behind them or in front of them. And so she told her to jump back in the wagon, and they took off with their bounty, paper. So that one little story right there kind of made sense because it told about, at least somebody noticed there was stuff strewn about. And so that was one first hand account.
Getting some of the train areas.
The gist of that, what all happened there is how that came about was that Sherman, after 3 attempts to get into Atlanta, he couldn't really get into Atlanta, and he was frustrated, and so he was going to send his cavalry down to burn the railroads, and with the thought that if he burned the railroads, that none of the supplies could get to Atlanta, and he could force Johnston or Hood out of Atlanta. Johnston and Hood. Johnston was relieved by Hood somewhere in that mix, and so talk about both of them. But so what he did, he sent his cavalry down south to burn and tear up the railroads at Lovejoy, and then to come across, Palmetto, and then to come across to Lovejoy. And in doing so, they came through Fayette County.
Okay.
And came across this wagon train of supplies that were sent down south of Atlanta to be held here for the Confederate Army in Atlanta. And the way they described this wagon train is that it held baggage and weapons and materials that mostly officers, belongings. And so if this happening at night, they didn't really have time to go through the stuff and loot it, so they burn it. Supposedly burn all this wagons of officers' uniforms and buckles. So this would be a great prize for somebody in my generation, in my day, to come along and find with a metal detector, which is what I've tried to do. Everybody in the world has, and I have found some of it. And so that's the gist of the story. And so when they came down from the west side of Atlanta and crossed the Chattahoochee River and then came through Palmetto. They sacked Palmetto. They burned Palmetto and burnt the depot, tore up the tracks, and burnt some businesses and just left it in ruins. And they said you could see the fires from Newnan Palmetto burning. And then they came across, and all this was kind of at night, in the darkness of night, and they came across through the area of Tyrone and came across into western Fayette County, and that's where they encountered these wagons in the wagon train. And they I don't think it was one continuous line of wagons. I think it was in squads, parked along the road here and parked along the road there, and up in the woods. And so, but they got them and took a lot of the Teamsters prisoners. And my great-great-grandfather was a Teamster at one time. I don't know if he was involved in that. They don't leave much record of what his role was, but he was a Teamster, and I know that he got a Confederate Medal of Honor after the war, so there must have been something he done. I don't know if he got captured or something, but never have figured that one out. But anyway, they came through Fayetteville. They stopped in Fayetteville to have a little fun, and of course they had the lawyer here that tried to detract them from burning the courthouse, because that's what everybody thought. They had burned these wagons. They were coming into town. All these fires were going on and smoke, and so they thought that they were going to
legitimate fear.
Burn the courthouse. Right. I mean, just obvious. And so they really didn't have that on their mind, but they didn't say we're not going to do it, but they didn't say we're going to do it. So Tidwell decided to distract them, and so what he did, he put a large Confederate flag in in his window of his law office. His law office was down there on the square about where Town Square Jewelers is now. Okay. And so they immediately, focused on that, and he was out there, probably berating them, and so they got him, took the flag and burned it, or captured it, took it with them, whatever, and started harassing him. And little did they know that he was a signer of the secession ordinance. If they had known that, they would give him double the trouble that they gave him. But anyway, they put him on a little mule, and he was a portly man. He was about 250 pounds, 275, a little short guy. But he was a lawyer, so he was well versed and all that. And so they started parading him around and around the courthouse, just having a good time with him. And so he started, just going along with it, and started making fun of himself, and started, quoting Shakespeare and all these crazy things, I guess that's our phone. I don't know.
Never heard it.
I have not heard it.
You want me to grab it?
Okay. Nah, just it's got to record.
That's fine. Okay.
So anyway, while that was going on, they were gathering up prisoners in Fayetteville. They were going through houses and looting houses, and there was one right there on the square that they went in. We've got some first-hand accounts of what they did inside these houses. And the Bennett house, they went in there, and they tried to get Mr. William Bennett to tell them where the gold was buried and all that kind of stuff, and they strung him up and almost hung him. And the story goes that Miss Bennett showed them a Masonic sign, and they, an officer came along and made his men behave, and all those stories come out of it. And they took some silver candlesticks out of the Blaylock house here on the corner, and no telling what all they took. But in the meantime, there was a captured captain of the 10th Georgia who was staying at the Tidwell house, and he saw that his friend was in trouble, but he was unable to do anything about it because he had been wounded at Cold Harbor, and he was recuperating from the wound. And they drug him across the square to McCook's headquarters, and wanting to get out of him what they could get out of him, which direction to go and all this and that and the other. And so anyway, when they finally left Fayetteville, they took just about the whole town with them, and took off toward Lovejoy. And so they went over there and did the same exact thing they did at Palmetto. They burnt the depot, tore up the tracks, tried to disable the railroads. And in the meantime, Joe Wheeler found out what was going on. He was in, up east of Atlanta, chasing some of the other Yankees around. And so he found out what was going on. So he came down actually and sent Harrison and Ross and all them down this way and said, we gotta put a stop to all this. And so they got down to Lovejoy about the time McCook was finishing up, and they started chasing him back across the county. And that one of the results of that was the skirmish out at Shake Rag that we heard so much about. We heard that there was a skirmish at Ebenezer Church. Ebenezer Church is just right outside of Shake Rag, and so that's how that came about. And when I went to the archives, I found where the UDC had recorded some memories from some people who lived out there at the time, and they did talk about that battle at Shake Rag, and they talked about how some of them were wounded and killed and lay out in the yard of one of the families out there. And later on we found out that in 1867 that the government had come down to that area and was looking for the graves of those Yankees that had been shot, killed and buried out there, and it gave detailed accounts of where they found the graves, and in a couple of instances it gave the names of the soldiers because the people remembered who they were and had written it down. And it's all seemed to kind of hover around the Asa Mitchell house, which was on Ebenezer Church Road, and that's where that historical marker is now. It's pretty close to where that was. Okay. And so I was Eddie Lanham got that going, and I helped him put that marker up out there. So at least we know, we have that marked. And so anyway, they chased Wheeler chased McCook through Fayette County, had some skirmishing, that was the main skirmish out there at Shake Rag, and then they chased him on, had a little skirmish at Line Creek.
As John was talking to me, he kept on telling me even more history that expanded to some of the different battles around the Fayette County area. And I thought those might make a good segment for future podcasts. Instead of including them all on this, I wanted to really focus in on the Fayette County Courthouse for this one. But his knowledge of Fayette County, folks, is completely immeasurable. He is such an asset to this community. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me today. I do want a little shout out to Jesse Brooks on Facebook. He responded to one of my posts asking for any suggestions about future episodes. It was kind of interesting because a few of his suggestions are actually things I've got in the works for 2026. But Jesse also mentioned a few other ideas that I will try to incorporate also. So thank you very much, Jesse, for taking the time to respond. Some of our upcoming episodes will include some of the theaters in Fayette County, a history of that. I'm hoping to get together and sit down and talk with a few gentlemen about the history of Brooks. Another episode will be the high school athletes who made it to the professional leagues. And I hope by mid to late summer, I will have one on the mills of Fayette County. I've got a few interviews scheduled for that, but some of those can't take place until a little bit later. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me on Fayette Footprints. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram under the profile at Fayette Footprints. As well as you can reach me by email through fayettefootprints@gmail.com. You can find episodes through most major podcatchers or go directly to buzzsprout.fayettefootprints.com. Finally, I hope you keep on listening and keep on studying history, and I hope that you keep sharing that history. Thank you so much.